The village that came together to save its 15th century pub from a developer, 470 residents of Somerset community chip in and raise £1 million to buy their beloved watering hole, the Packhorse Inn. The Packhorse Inn Somerset reopened today after locals fought to save it. Property developers bought the Southstoke Grade-II listed tavern 6 years ago. The developers planned to turn it into flats, which angered residents in the area. They used the 2011 Localism Act to turn the pub into a community asset. A 15th century pub reopened its doors today after locals raised more than £1 million and used a little-known law to save it from developers. The community saw 470 of its residents club together to raise the total and buy back their beloved pub. Developers bought the Grade-II listed tavern in Southstoke, Somerset in 2016 from a pair of businessmen who intended to renovate the pub into flats. The buyer had plans to turn the property into a private residence, which sparked anger among residents who bought back the watering hole using the 2011 Localism Act to turn the pub into a community asset. The first community offer to buy the pub was declined by the seller, but due to the law being evoked by the council, the property had to be sold within a year. The act gave the community time to raise funds to put in a bid to the previous owner, who told the community if they could raise £500,000 he would sell it to them. Between them they raised £1,025,000, who paid as little as £50 each to own the Packhorse Inn. If they were to split it equally, this would have worked out at £2,180 each. The first pint to be poured after the village pub in Southstoke resumed service was by Brian Perkins, 87, who was born there when it was run by his family. As well as being born in the pub, Mr. Perkins, he also had his wedding reception there with his wife Edith, 88. He said, "I was very sad when the pub closed a few years ago. I would go to the pub every Sunday up until then. It was an honor to be asked to pour the first pint, a last bit of fame in my old age. I was born in a room above the area where the bar is in 1930 and later had my wedding reception there. Aged 21, I was posted to join Royal Engineers in Maidstone, Kent, and when I arrived they said, we're going overseas in a few days for 2 years. I ran to a phone, rang Edith and said, can we get married at the weekend? I worked with the local farmer since I was 12, and he heard straight away, because it goes around a village like lightning. He rushed into our cottage and said to Edith, my dear, I'll take you to the wedding ceremony in Wells in the milk van. We had the reception back at the pub, and 40 family members and close friends from the village turned out. The carved stone above the pub's door suggests the building was erected in 1674, however historians argue the alehouse has been around since 1498. In March 2012, the pub was put up for sale by then-owners Punch Taverns, and it was sold to the highest bidder. A pair of businessmen who wanted to take the pub away from the locals and make it their own home signed its death sentence, a familiar fate for pubs closing in Britain on a daily basis. Less than a year later, in February 2013, the Packhorse was entered into B&S's Assets of Community Value list under the Localism Act. In October, the new owner of the Packhorse announced their intention to sell. The village got together to discuss the next step. They placed a bid for the building, but the offer was turned down. However, under the Localism Act, the owner has to sell the property within a year, no matter who comes forward first. In September 2015, the owner tried to file with the council to change the use of the basement and ground floor. It was one step towards trying to turn the pub to a private house. But their bid was turned down again, likely due to the many rejections that were filed with the council. As many as 25 are said to be shutting down every week, and the trend doesn't look like it will be reversing anytime soon. But residents in Southstoke chose to fight the trend and decided not to let their beloved pub go. The fireplace has been restored to its former glory, while the worn-out interior has been strengthened, meaning the village might have its pub back again. A painting of the Packhorse Inn, which is believed to have been erected in 1674. Pesner architectural guides describe Southstoke as a rare example of a real village that is within walking distance of a mainline station. Barristers, accountants and even celebrities who keep a low profile have called the community their home and have fought to keep the pub, which is steeped in history. During renovation work on the Packhorse, builders found a priest hole inside the home facade and under the crisscrossing timber beams. Historic photos show the village pub, which was rescued by the Conservatives' 2011 Localism Act, which meant it entered into the Assets of Community Value list in February 2013. The holes were used to hide Catholic priests in the 16th century while they were being persecuted. Catholic clergymen were targeted because of several assassination plots on Queen Elizabeth I. They aimed at getting her off the throne so her Roman Catholic cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, would take over the crown. Early records from Southstoke's hearth tax returns, 1664-1665, show the building was once owned by the Charmberry family, who were known for managing inns in the area. Former engineer Brian said, "My Gran Emily Rose was ahead of her time when she had the pub and didn't think pubs should just be for men to drink, and she arranged meals such as afternoon tea and suppers for the village folk. Supper would be a large chunk of bread and a bit of cheese with tomatoes from the garden. The seating area in the refurbished pub is the garden where she would grow vegetables." British soldiers were rehabilitated in Southstoke during World War II, and they would sneak into a nearby allotment where Brian would deliver 5 2-pint bottles from the pub. Later, in 1943, Brian would do the same for American soldiers staying in the village. Former engineer Brian said, "My Gran Emily Rose was ahead of her time when she had the pub and didn't think pubs should just be for men to drink, and she arranged meals such as afternoon tea and suppers for the village folk. Supper would be a large chunk of bread and a bit of cheese with tomatoes from the garden. The seating area in the refurbished pub is the garden where she would grow vegetables." British soldiers were rehabilitated in Southstoke during World War II, and they would sneak into a nearby allotment where Brian would deliver 5 2-pint bottles from the pub. Later, in 1943, Brian would do the same for American soldiers staying in the village.